August 1970, New York. 50,000 women marched down Fifth Avenue.
Put a woman behind that counter! Get lost! Freedom!
If I wanted to go and be a bus driver, I think I should have the right to apply, and if I can drive a bus, be able to drive it. To me, women's liberation means being able to go out, look for an apartment, and not have the door slammed in my face because I'm not married.
They say they want genuine equality with men, under the law, at home and at work.
Never forget when I turned the corner at the Hotel Plaza, I could not see to the end. It was the most exciting day. It was the time that the women's movement became a movement.
The campaign in the United States is another stage in a long fight. Since the start of the century, women have been battling attitudes that hold them back. Yet around the world, half the people still can't enjoy all the freedoms the other half take for granted. Pioneer campaigners had to struggle to get the most basic political rights. It wasn't until after the First War that women in the United States and most of Europe finally won the vote. Even then, Britain limited it to those who were over 30 and married. Not till the 1929 election could all women over 21 vote on an equal basis with men. Mary Stott had just passed her birthday.
I got up very early in the morning, donned a scarlet frock because I was voting Labour, and Labour red was the Labour colour, and set off for the polling station, hoping that I might be the very first woman to vote at the age of 21. Very thrilling. I felt this was history. It was history. It was wonderful.
The vote was only the start. For most women in the industrialized countries, it made no difference to the assumptions that governed their lives. Most were confined to the home as wives and mothers. And the millions who needed to go out to work in the mills and factories were seen as a source of cheap labor and paid less than men. In the rest of the world and the countries of the European empires, women were completely subservient. They worked long hours in the fields, set to the heaviest physical labor and the most repetitive tasks. Their place was defined by tradition and custom, as secondary to men. In the Islamic countries, religion was the strongest influence on the way women behaved. In public, they wore the veil, or chador, at all times. But in the 1930s, one Islamic country lived through a cathartic change that affected all women. Attempting to modernize Iran and bring it into line with the West, the Shah ordered his country's women to take off their veils in 1936. Maalood Khanluri was a young girl in Tehran.
اون روزی که چادر رو ورداشتیم که برای اولین بار میشد فکر کرد ولی یک جرأتی
Above all, unveiling gave us a new boldness, a new braveness. We didn't fear anyone anymore. A window opened. It was as if we were in a closed place where a fire was burning and the smoke was suffocating us. And suddenly the doors opened. The fire was quenched. We could breathe. We'd all been rescued. This was the feeling.
But in a country where religion was a central part of daily life, others were outraged. Tension between the modernizers and the traditional believers was only suppressed. it didn't disappear. In Britain, the Second World War was a turning point, raising women's awareness of what they were capable of. With so many men called up, women had a chance to work on an equal basis.
The Ministry of Labour has launched a big scheme for training 500,000 women for arms production. Miss Caroline Hazlitt, advisor to the ministry, appeals to the women of Britain.
500,000 extra women will be needed in industry by the summer of next year. And I am quite certain that women will want to respond to this great call to help to bring victory nearer.
Up to then, large companies had been proud of the way they'd kept women out.
My firm's always made a point of not employing women. They said a man should be paid enough to keep a wife and family in comfort. All that's changed now. Temporarily, there's a worthwhile job for women folk at the same basic rate of pay as men. 1,000 women are carrying on the good work until the men come back.
At Ford's in Dagenham, one of the women who answered the call was Lillian Gillan.
I started on a piston line. Nobody else but men had done it. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought it was a good time for women. And then I looked up into the air and see this crane going by, and I decided I'd like to be a crane driver. I worked cranes from 5 ton to 30 ton, all over the different areas. Driving a crane was great because I always liked to try and do something nobody else done. And I liked it because it was definitely a man's job.
When the United States joined the war, the same appeal was made.
We must win this war, but we can't win this war unless you women take over the jobs that men are leaving. English women have done it for 3 years. American women are now doing it all over the country.
How do you like it?
I love it.
But the temporary nature of it all was constantly emphasized.
And Lee Dunning, who now welds on landing barges. And what about after this war, Lee?
Well, this job belongs to some soldier. And when he comes back, he can have it.
Oh, that's swell.
After 1945, the soldiers were released from the army in their millions and came home to assurances that their old jobs were still open to them.
Warriors, welcome. What's waiting for you? You'd be surprised. Now these women are going back to make a home for their demobilized men. After 5 years of working to this tune, there's no escaping it.
Joyce Whedon knew the limits.
Women were expected to be housewives, cleaners, cooks, mothers. That basically was women's role in life.
But crane driver Lillian Gillan tried to find another employer who'd let her do the job she'd learned.
I said, I've brought my permit with me. Is there any chance of me getting a crane driving job? And he laughed at me and he said, women don't do crane driving here. He said, you'll never get a crane driver's job. It's not a lady's job. I would have liked to have kept that job all my life, really, until I decided to retire.
In the 1940s and 50s, in the country which took so much pride in its progressiveness, there was a return to the idea that women were there to support men.
Throughout the length and breadth of America, in every city and town, every day in the week is somebody's wedding day. I pronounce that they are husband and wife. No ceremony more deeply symbolizes every woman's hopes.
Women were expected to find satisfaction at home, bringing up a family.
As I was growing up, I dreamed about Prince Charming. I did meet him. And I wanted to have a home and a family and a normal, average, ordinary life with children. And I really didn't have tremendous expectations.
Films and advertisements on both sides of the Atlantic helped reinforce the stereotype, equating happiness with fulfillment at home.
Difference if you're rich or poor, or if you're smart or dumb. A woman's place in this old world is under some man's thumb.
Glad you dropped in. Amazing, isn't it? Look at that. And she did the washing and ironing today for a family of 5. The 4 of us and the baby upstairs.
These are the sort of things that make my mouth water. I'm all for this kind of education. It's like taking out third-party insurance on mankind's future digestion. June's finished her polishing, Mavis has made the beds, Anne's done the sweeping. But what's a home without a man about the house? And that's where the headmaster, Edwin Crawford, comes in. And trust a man to know the right time to arrive. This is 1 cup of coffee that'll be right up to standard, but not unless he comes back for a second will she get top marks.
On the first morning of our honeymoon, I discovered my beautiful bride didn't know the first thing about coffee. And I love good coffee. Wife, I said, this is Maxwell House. So remember, be a good little Maxwell housewife, and this honeymoon could last forever.
Woman's lot is to give and give, and go on giving.
Carol took a general home economics course. Not one which would lead to professional employment, but one which fitted her for that very important career of being Mrs. Bill Johnson.
And of course, women were less technically competent than men.
Open the door!
Sorry, honey. My watch stopped.
That's because you forgot to wind it again, Alice.
Even when women's energy was acknowledged, the tone was patronizing.
What is that whipcord resilience that lets the weaker sex play half the night, then bob up clear-eyed, ready for the next morning's work?
In fact, 1/3 of all American women worked outside the home. But in the 1950s, most were still restricted to low-paying menial jobs with no chance of becoming supervisors or managers. At the Southern Bell Phone Company, the management had a clear policy on what was appropriate for women. They could be operators, but go no higher. Lorena Weeks worked on a switchboard in Atlanta, Georgia.
Telephone operators work around the clock, and I worked split hours so that I could be with my children in the afternoon. I'd go to work at 11, get off at 2 in the afternoon, pick them up from school, feed them, and go back to work at 7 o'clock at night. That was hard. I worked 17 years before I had a half day for Christmas with my children. I'd watch these men, the switchmen, and work that I felt that I could do. And this meant so much more pay and better hours. And it was just type work that I would like to do too.
Whatever education women had, or whatever their interests, the limits were the same. Dusty Rhodes graduated from college in 1950, but knew her childhood dream of being a pilot would never be realized.
We had the national air races in Cleveland every year, and so aviation was very big in my life. And I had, up till I was in high school and found out from my father, you can't be an airline pilot, darling, they don't hire ladies. It broke my heart, but so I settled on being maybe a flight attendant, maybe stewardess.
Every day I'm learning more. It'll make me a good stewardess, a better human being, and after a while, maybe, a better wife. At least I can dream, can't I?
The image of a stewardess is of a young, single girl. And the airlines wanted to perpetuate that almost as an image that the male could get on there and think, maybe I may have a date tonight.
Eastern Airlines presents The Losers.
She's awkward. Not very friendly. But she's too young. Oh, she bites nails. she wears glasses. Honey, no, the other. Oh, she's married. Well.
Like everyone else, Dusty Rhodes was expected to stop the job when she turned 32.
That made me angry. It really did. It just it violated my sense of fair play that pilots can be fired at age 60 and we were fired at age 32. There's something was wrong there.
Even when women did break through to the jobs they wanted, they found new barriers. Mary Stott managed to become a journalist but couldn't get promotion.
I would train young man after young man, and then they would step over my head and give me instructions, and I just couldn't endure it. So I went to the editor rather nervously and said, "Why, Mr. Henry, don't I measure up?" "Oh," he said, "there's nothing wrong with your work, but we have to safeguard the succession, and the successor has to be a man."
By the 1960s, more Western women were coming out of higher education than ever before, with new ambitions for themselves. And as prosperity grew and new appliances went into more homes, some of the old drudgery was removed.
These labor-saving, time-saving devices in our homes free a woman so she...
As this happened, many American women grew dissatisfied and frustrated. They found their manifesto in a book that became a bestseller in 1963. In The Feminine Mystique, New York academic Betty Friedan wrote a devastating critique of the modern woman's situation. Women, as well as men, can only find their identity in work that uses their full capacities. A woman cannot find her identity in the dull routine of housework, she wrote. If a job is to be the way out of the trap for a woman, it must be a job that she can take seriously as part of a life plan, work in which she can grow as part of society.
The majority of American women in many age groups are working outside the home, but most of them are working at low-paid, relatively low-skilled jobs, often in a dead end from professional advancement, and they are not really taking part in the decision-making areas of American life in anything except token numbers.
For some, like Colleen Perot, who'd got married after the war, Friedan's ideas were anathema.
I thought, how strange. What is wrong with this woman? Everybody I knew was not oppressed and was very happy and was not miserable, and we were all enjoying raising our families.
But for other housewives like Jackie Ceballos, the feminine mystique was a revelation.
Betty Friedan was speaking to me. I was a married woman trapped. It just expanded my life. The first thing I thought of was, instead of blaming my husband or myself, I realized it wasn't us, it was the society.
In 1963, American society was changing fast. The campaign for civil rights for black Americans was making real progress. Women's grievances became another cause. They called for an end to discrimination on grounds of gender, too. The Great March in Washington that year led to a landmark victory for all minorities, and also for women. President Johnson's Civil Rights Act of 1964 guaranteed equal rights for everyone. With the passing of the act, women started to apply for jobs they'd previously been barred from. Telephone operator Lorena Weeks saw her chance.
I was very excited. I knew this would mean that women could have better paying jobs. I bid on the job for switchman, and my bid was returned, stating that this was not a job being awarded to women.
Citing the Civil Rights Act, Weeks took her fight to be a telephone engineer to court. But she lost when the company found an obscure law that barred women from lifting more than 30 pounds.
It was just foolish to use something like that against women. Women every day lift babies that weigh more than 30 pounds.
Lorena Weeks finally got to do the job, but it took 5 years and an appeal to the Supreme Court.
It was absolutely wonderful. I couldn't believe it was over. I was numb. This was a point of law. It was a wrong that needed to be made right, and that's what I was trying to do, to make things better.
Even before they tried to get the more demanding jobs, working women in Britain had to fight for a more basic principle. In 1968, women machinists at Ford's at Dagenham were paid 20% less than their male colleagues. Joyce Whedon felt they were unfairly graded.
The issue was we were being treated unfairly as women because the men were getting a different rate of pay to the women.
Women in the trim shop tried to argue their case to the management.
We've been getting nowhere with our arguments. It was just, they're women. They're just getting in a dander. They'll calm down soon. They're just getting a bee in their bonnet. Nobody was sure of what they were going to do. And one of the girls said to me, "Are we going out? Or should we wait till?" And I just picked up my bag, switched the machine off, put my scissors in my bag and said, "Right, I've stopped work. Who's coming?" And 187 women closed the Ford plant down.
We are on strike.
All of you?
All of us. All the machinists, anyway.
So yes. No car seat covers for Fords?
No, not from us, anyway.
Joyce Whedon had never been active in the union, but was now on the strike committee.
The biggest surprise of all was when I found myself on a march, a protest rally along the embankment. I found myself in the House of Commons lobbying MPs.
We've got 5,000 men laid off as a result of this now.
Yes.
Does this not worry you?
No, of course it worries me, but we've all got that responsibility. But if we always study the men, we'll never get anywhere.
The dispute lasted 3 weeks before the company gave in and agreed new pay rates. The women who'd taken on Ford voted to return to work.
We raised the issue of equal pay for women, definitely. Because suddenly you have women workers everywhere demanding the same rate as the male workers doing the same job. I think we were the first to stand up.
As a result of the women's action, equal pay became a national issue.
Victims of industrial apartheid, second-class citizens, cheap labour and child miners. That is how women like these have been described by ardent fighters for this elementary piece of justice, equal pay for women.
In 1970, just 2 years later, Parliament passed an Equal Pay Act, which made discrimination illegal. But it was a scientific breakthrough, not a change in the law, that made the most difference to women's lives. The birth control pill did more than anything else to give them an entirely new sort of freedom.
This is a highly effective means of contraception. I think the figures currently being used indicate that it's about 99-point-something effective.
By preventing ovulation, the pill let women control their fertility as never before. By 1966, 6 million American women used the contraceptive pill. By 1968, 11 million. Almost overnight, long-held constraints on sexual behavior could be thrown aside. Moral attitudes were changing, and a sexual revolution was underway. Starting at university in Michigan in 1969, Amy Cohen had freedom her mother's generation had never known.
It was just like a new world had opened up to me. I'm 19 years old, I'm at a big university, and the world is telling me, and Betty Friedan is telling me, I can do anything I want. It's like going from 0 to 100, and your mind spins. We didn't know quite what we were doing in our relationships, but they were going to be equal. Equal was our word. Well, one mistake, and you're off in the suburbs, home, having babies and starting a family, and it was over.
Amy Cohen asked the student health clinic for the pill.
I was raised that I wasn't going to have sex until I was walking down the aisle. And so there I sat as a college student with my wonderful partner in the waiting room, and I'm thinking, if we're all equal, why am I in here by myself? Having to choke out that I needed the birth control pill. It sounds funny now, but, when I was 19 and it was real hard.
women now expected the pill would make it easier to combine children with a career. Amy Cohen went on to graduate, married, and planned her family with precision.
I figured out exactly when I needed to get pregnant so that this baby would be born 2 weeks after finals, and then I'd have a 6-week maternity leave, and then I'd teach a class, and then I'd be full-time again in the fall. And it happened. Twins.
And though nature could still confound the best-laid plans, the pill brought a new equality to relationships. Annie Lou Elias was determined to have a small family, though she knew her husband wanted a large one.
Taking the pill meant breaking with tradition, for one thing. I would have had, or I should have had, all the children my husband wanted. Without the pill, he would have been able to control me. Otherwise, he didn't even know when I took it. I hid them so well that I could keep on taking them and said, I don't know why I'm not getting pregnant.
Using the pill, Annie Lou Elias kept her children to 2.
It was like stopping the whole mechanism in the world against women and against myself. I stopped being subject to things and being a person.
In the age of the pill, and with Betty Friedan as their Bible, American activists began what soon became a mass movement.
In the name of the Mother, the Daughter, and the Holy Granddaughter, women.
They knew the importance of publicity and went all out to court it. They challenged every example of male dominance, including the church. Jackie Ceballos, who'd felt trapped, became a leading campaigner.
From childhood, little boys think that they're going to grow up to be God, and this is consciousness raising. We say, hey, church, if you really, really think of all human beings, you better start changing that image of, you see that thing, and God created woman in her own image.
It was a fabulous, fabulous time because it was like a fever of excitement of all the women changing their lives.
I'm talking about the partnership because if marriage is anything, it's a partnership.
I mean if somebody else takes care of the child. This is what I meant.
But what is your responsibility to the kids?
There was an anger welling up in you all the time. Here we were, American women, we had the best life in the world. What did we want? They didn't understand that we wanted to be thinking human beings and take responsibility of running this world equally with men.
To the feminists, the annual television beauty pageant seemed a gross offense.
Miss Illinois is Miss America. We are going to sing your song. Oh, there she is, Miss America. There she is.
Inside, one set of young women accepted the chauvinist baubles. Outside, others carried on with more consciousness raising. Jackie Ceballos was there again.
Women use your brains, not your bodies.
We threw bras and girdles and stockings, high-heeled shoes and cosmetics into the trash can. The press loved it, and we learned very early on that the press liked crazy things, so let's use the press. We didn't burn any bras. They would have happened if they had allowed us to have a fire.
The stunts got the coverage they wanted, but at some risk to their reputation.
For those who think that the women's liberation movement is a joke vaguely connected with burning bras and getting in the men-only bars, may I disabuse you of that notion. It is about equal pay and equal opportunity in the job market.
What the American women were doing was reported around the world and spawned similar campaigns in Europe.
Woman in position to achieve felicity. We will vote ourselves in power with our own majority for its liberation time.
In
In America, they'd started to burn their bras and a women's movement had already begun. We thought, if they can do it, we have to do it in Holland.
In 1970, Rita Hendricks helped found the Dutch feminist group Dolle Mine, which spread the word in Amsterdam.
To publicise the campaign, we used television and radio. It was the first time something like this had been tried, and it came bang straight into thousands of homes.
Bam, in duizenden huiskamers. We waren zo slecht
We were so badly organised. We didn't have an office, a phone number or a bank account.
Binnen een maand hadden we iets van 3.000 tot 4.000.
Within a month we had 3,000 to 4,000 members. There were 18 of us at the beginning. It was really incredible.
Ongelooflijk. We hadden dus een actie tegen het waarschuwen.
We had action days. We protested at the town hall when this couple got married.
Bij een bruidspaar.
Actiegroep de Dolle Mine wil afschaffing van de vrouwenslavernij. Ze willen
Wat moet ik hem
Geef mij dat boekje maar eens, ik ben het hier helemaal mee eens.
En een van die punten is dus van dat vrouwen altijd...
One of the points was that every day women are approached in a way that we don't want.
Bejegend worden op een manier die je niet wil.
Men whistle at women, make noises and say things, and many women feel scared on the street. We thought we should turn this around.
Before letting Dutch men have a taste of their own medicine, Rita briefed her fellow activists.
Echt een lekker stuk uitzoeken, hè? Een echte goeie. Hè? Zo werkelijk die er ook goed uitziet en niet zo'n halve slapper.
Het was leuk, we hadden er plezier in.
It was fun. We were young, enthusiastic, and we really thought we'd change the world.
Keep young and beautiful. It's your duty to be beautiful.
In Britain, the approach could be gentler. At one demonstration, they used music to get the message across.
Don't fail to do your stuff with a little powder and a puff. Keep young and beautiful if you want to be loved.
We thought that the words of the song were so blatant that no one could fail to see that it was ironic.
Officially, they'd gained equal pay. Now they wanted to be accepted by men and society on their own terms.
A few years ago, it was a joke. People laughed at us. They don't laugh at us anymore. They take us very seriously. And we know that we're just at the point where we're really getting through to the national consciousness.
When the message got through to the consciousness of popular programs, it could become a little confused.
Equality. We want equality. This is no feminine frivolity. We'd like some recognition for our status. We weren't put on this earth to peel potatoes.
Excuse me, sir, how do you feel about women pinching men's bottoms in the street?
I regret to say it's never happened to me before.
Never?
In Iran, where they'd given up the veil only 30 years before, the changes for women had accelerated. When the Shah crowned his wife Farah Empress in 1968, she became a role model. She shared his modernizing goals. Whole new possibilities had been opened to Iran's women. Once denied the most basic schooling, they now had full equality in higher education. Marshid Shahi was at Tehran University.
I studied physics. My younger sister studied physics after me and then later on went into computer science. My older sister wanted to be an architect. I knew I could choose my way of life, what I wanted to study, my boyfriends. I never thought any ambition was forbidden as far as I was concerned. I could do anything I wanted to.
In the cities, educated women were going into government jobs and becoming lawyers, engineers, or scientists.
All the doors were open to us. Iran had become a part of the big world.
It was a world in which, at least in some countries, women had now made it to the top. India had a woman prime minister, so did Israel. There was another in Sri Lanka. And before the 1970s were out, a woman leader in Britain too.
To me, it's like a dream that the next name in the line, Harold Macmillan, Alec Douglas Hume, and Edward Heath, is Margaret Thatcher.
Despite what was happening at the top, individual working women had to make their own assaults on each male preserve. After years as a conductress in Coventry, Daphne Richards wanted to drive the bus.
We went into the driving school, and then they said, you'll never make it. You never last the course. You'll never get a full load round a corner. All the sexist comments you can think of. And we said, shut up.
Change to second here.
I was the first one to go out on the road as a lady driver. It was a very heavy job. I don't mind admitting it. I just wanted to prove I could drive a bus. Well, why not? I mean, some of the men, they were so tiny and they were so thin. I thought, I've got to prove I can drive a bus.
Sometimes the pioneers had to call on reserves of courage and stamina they'd never expected to need. When she was 18, Karen Harrison was determined to work on the railways.
I want to be the driver of an Intercity 125.
I wrote off to British Rail saying I'd like to become a train driver, and I didn't sign my name, I just put Kay Harrison, so they obviously thought that I was a young man. I was called to an interview, and it was not actually till I turned up for the interview that they got the shock of their lives and realised I was female. And the whole interview basically was designed to put me off the job. I know when I did my exams that people were waiting for me to fall flat on my behind, and they felt that if I passed it would denigrate the job.
But Karen did pass the exams.
I was the first woman to actually get a driver's job, so it was still quite an unusual thing.
The woman in the cab now had to contend with the men's hostility.
It was open warfare. People wouldn't work with me, people put notes up about me on the notice case, my locker was defaced, the pornography went up in the mess room, but not just the usual bosoms and bums kind of stuff, but, you know, the kind of stuff that gynecologists probably have to read when they're learning to be gynecologists.
Karen was determined to keep her job.
I've never wanted to be pushed out. I knew if I'd left the railway, I would have let these people win, and what was happening was wrong and it wasn't fair. And it's now put me in a position where, when it happens to other women, I now know how to help them.
I am woman, hear me roar, in numbers too big to ignore.
But despite the setbacks, Western women were managing to do things they'd not done before.
'Cause I've heard it all before.
They could drive racing cars, play baseball.
It just felt so good to play. No one could tell me I can't do something just because I'm a girl.
In the professions, they were a tiny minority. In business, they complained of a glass ceiling. But in theory, there were now no limits.
First American woman to venture into space will be Dr. Sally K. Ride.
Shirley Chisholm becomes the first black woman nominated for president.
From the 1980s on, commercials told a different story, glamorizing a new type of woman who was taking charge.
What are those?
They're the best. We generally recommend those for ground coffee.
We'll buy all you have of these.
Hadn't I better clear that with the boss?
You just have.
With the high-tech skills you learn in the Navy, when it comes time for you to say something on an interview.
I have an extensive background in avionics and electronics. I'm computer literate, and I'm pretty good with people.
You'll actually have something to say.
I hadn't really noticed until I was in my 30s when I kind of looked up and realized that, you know, I made a very decent salary, and I had a very responsible job, and I had wonderful children. That I realized how personally I had benefited from all the social changes I had spent my entire life trying to have happen.
We can cross over 50 time zones in less than a week, and it's a schedule that gives me headaches. I have a crew and 400 passengers that count on me.
It gives me a big thrill when I go up that cockpit and I see a gal. I could be a pilot now. I could be a doctor instead of a nurse. I'd be a pilot instead of the flight attendant. Be a senator instead of the secretary.
But if some in the West took it for granted that women everywhere shared the same ideas of progress, what happened in Iran in 1979 proved them wrong. With the return of Ayatollah Khomeini from exile and the overthrow of the Shah, an extraordinary turnabout began. Millions of Iranian women went back to the veil.
Our chador is our symbol for our Islamic revolution. It is just a sign of being together.
For those women who'd embraced the reforms, the fundamentalist revival seemed a crippling blow.
I couldn't stop crying hearing those women yelling. I thought a catastrophe was coming to my country. If the day of the unveiling was a day of joy and happiness, then that day was a day of mourning and misery.
After the Islamic Revolution, the government called on women to return to their traditional role as set out in the Quran. Many stopped work and returned home. Girls as young as 6 were encouraged to wear the veil. School books were rewritten to reflect Islamic values. Nevertheless, when the Ayatollah declared it was illegal for women to be seen in public without the chador, thousands of pro-reform women took the risk of defying the decree openly.
The Shah pulled the chador down by force. These people are putting it up by force.
Tehran student Mashid Shahi took part in the protest.
I was amazed by the number of women. People from all parts of Iran and all classes. All they were saying was that we will not go back to veil, and we will not have that.
The demonstration was broken up by the revolutionary police, and from then on Iranian women had to comply with religious decrees.
The veil is not a matter of personal taste, to choose to like or dislike. It's a social question. If I go without a veil, it'll tempt men and lead to an immoral society. Like a pearl, the woman places herself inside a shell to improve herself from within.
In much of the world, the limitations Western women had to contend with seemed of a quite different order to the real dangers and exploitation still faced by women. In China, the revolutionary government had made a great commitment to women's emancipation. Yet ordinary Chinese continued to value male children more highly than girls.
生男孩就是个大喜了，就是生女孩了就是小喜吧。生了男孩以后就是学咱们这个家里了。要是生了女孩嘞，就是出家了啊，不在咱们这个家。孙子跟孙女2个，那个是个大喜，这个是个小喜，这个意思。
Traditional attitudes were compounded by a government birth control policy that tried to limit families to 1 child each. Statistics show that instead of equal numbers of boys and girls, as in the West, China had only 88 females to every 100 males. The 30 million missing girls could only be accounted for by abortion, girl children abandoned to die, and infanticide. In much of Africa, women were still subject to a ritual that seemed abhorrent to many. Circumcision of young girls between the ages of 4 and 12. Traditional communities believed the practice helped preserve girls' virginity for marriage. In the 1980s, 90% of Sudanese girls were still being circumcised.
I have been circumcised. I was 5 years old, and I remember the day, the ceremony, and the pain of the operation. It is crushing in my ears. I don't think circumcision is good for women because it is a heritage of dark ages, and all women practice it because it suits their time, but not ours.
Governments made the custom illegal, and individual mothers tried to resist it. But women like Elham continued to face pressure to take their daughters to the local circumcisers. Like her own mother.
She is warning me every time that someday she will circumcise her. She said so, because this is her job. And I can't, I always say to her, this is forbidden by law. Now it's forbidden by law. And I don't want my child to be circumcised.
It was reckoned that each year, approximately 2 million girls in more than 30 countries were subjected to genital mutilation. In India, women campaigners tried to fight a dowry system that the government had already banned by law. When a bride's parents paid no dowry at the time of a marriage, tragedy could follow. It was estimated that over 6,000 brides were murdered each year by their husbands. One of 5 daughters, Sunita Aaron, was given away in an arranged marriage, but her new husband grew increasingly angry that he'd received no money along with his bride.
My husband slapped me twice around the face, and then he poured kerosene on me. I was screaming, "Save me, save me." And some boys across the street heard me and told police.
Outrage at the continuing dowry violence led women to take collective action. In Mexico and all over Latin America, women were still held back by traditional ideas about their role. Women like Serafina Gallardo struggled to take care of their families in a male-dominated culture.
I call it machismo, when the man tells the woman she has to do something, and the woman, as in my case, obeys without even thinking. The values become ingrained in us.
But the culture was changing, and there were signs that women were starting to assert themselves. Impoverished villagers were pouring into Mexico City from the country, and 20,000 had settled in a shanty town on a barren hillside. It was the women who led a self-help campaign to build proper housing. Serafina Gallardo worked to improve conditions.
There were no paved roads. There were trees, cactus, buckthorns all over. But we needed a place to live, so we began a fight to get the things we needed.
In the new settlement of San Miguel de Otongo, the women dug trenches for sewers and water pipes. And it was women who tried to browbeat the city authorities into providing the basic services they needed. Serafina Gallardo eventually got work in a clinic she'd helped construct herself. In 1995, with much fanfare, a huge women's conference was mounted in Beijing by the United Nations. It showed the yawning gap between the concerns of women in the prosperous West and those of the developing world. While one group talked of better childcare and more responsible jobs, others still wanted basic education, better health, and protection from violence and exploitation.
The great challenge of this conference is to give voice to women everywhere whose experiences go unnoticed, whose words go unheard. Women comprise more than half the world's population, 70% of the world's poor, and 2/3 of those who are not taught to read and write. We are the primary caretakers for most of the world's children and elderly, yet much of the work we do is not valued. It is no longer acceptable to discuss women's rights as separate from human rights.
By the end of the century, half the people had gained public commitments and new legal rights that the next generation would have to press home.